Today's first guest is someone incredibly special to our Breakthrough community. It's James Thredgold. James was our very first ambassador, but more importantly, he's a man who has turned unimaginable loss into compassion, connection, and service to others. After losing his wife Holly to suicide, James has continued to show up for people with extraordinary generosity, honesty, and heart. He's one of those rare humans who makes people feel seen, safe, and almost immediately deeply kind, compassionate, and thoughtful, and is an incredible father. Through his advocacy, his vulnerability, and his willingness to have difficult conversations, he's helped countless people feel less alone and somebody that I can honestly call a good friend. Sharing Holly's story clearly matters deeply to the people around her, and in many ways, keeping these conversations alive is a part of how her impact is continuing for others. So James, we're incredibly grateful that you've joined us here today. And also joining us today is Dr Ian Zajac from Flinders University, who is leading important and most vital work through the Breakthrough Suicide Prevention Fellowship. Ian has dedicated his career to advancing suicide prevention research and finding practical, evidence-based ways to better support people before they reach their crisis point. His work sits at the intersection of research, innovation, and real-world impact, helping shape how we understand and respond to suicide prevention here in Australia. What makes this conversation especially important, and it's not just about statistics or theories. It's about translating research into meaningful change that will save lives and strengthen our community. Ian, thank you for joining us today and for the work that you continue to do in this space.
This is a safe space where the silence speaks, where the truth can breathe, and you finally see no shame.
This episode is generously brought to you by James Thredgold Jewellers. Adelaide Jewellers, synonymous with craftsmanship, elegance, and South Australian artistry. Founded by James Thredgold, who is our Breakthrough Ambassador. He has supported the organisation since its beginning 8 years ago. A man of many talents, James not only creates stunning jewellery, but also dedicates his time to advocating for change in mental health. Visit James Thredgold Jewellers, where timeless craftsmanship meets modern elegance. Every piece is made to be cherished for generations.
Leading up to that, Hol had suffered some quite severe depression over in terms of her lifetime, a reasonably short span, which was exacerbated, I think, by having a couple of kids, postnatal depression that sort of manifested itself into probably a deeper sense of a lack of identity. I think that, over a period of time, you as a female, you're Holly Slatter, and then you get married and become Holly Thredgold, and then you have one child, and then the second child comes along, and all of a sudden you're, Sophie or Angus's mum, and you sort of lose that, a little bit of that identity. Holly also had an incredibly successful florist business that she chose to close down to concentrate on her children. And I think they're just all these little chinks in her armour that made all of that worse. We led a beautiful life. She was an amazing mother, and cared incredibly for her children, and had an amazing sense of their well-being and just their being in general.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken about this on lots of different occasions, and I know from that whole conversation around identity and that change of identity and that complexity that sits within that journey.
Yep.
You notice some changes in Holly, you notice some of those challenges. What were some of the most difficult parts about that? Because I think we've spoken before about being the partner and not being able to fix it.
Yeah, look, I probably always have seen myself as a bit of a fixer, but obviously with a chemical imbalance in the brain, it's not like a tap in your bathroom or something like that. It's a very complex set of circumstances. We were very lucky. We had a very supportive GP, and with Holly's consent, I could go and see him without her, and we could talk about how Holly was travelling and things like that. And he would certainly give me some tools around what I could do and some of the language that I could talk to her. Didn't always work. Holly had a very powerful personality, and if Holly didn't want to do something, it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
But in terms of medication, she was on board for that type of change and things like that. But first and foremost, she certainly didn't want to be removed or be away from her children. That was the sole point of her being at that stage.
And that part around as that's being the mother. You've always said that her love for her children was enormous, and you've continued and you've translated that into sort of very meaningful outcomes for your children. You got two beautiful children, but when you lost Holly, there was some big challenges that then you had to take on board. Are you happy to just talk a little bit more about that sort of role change for you? We've spoken about obviously the role change for Holly, but all of a sudden you're playing sort of two sort of roles in an area where you're also experiencing your own personal grief.
My first reaction, knee-jerk reaction, was sell the business, concentrate on the children. And it was funny, I'd booked a holiday to Noosa where we'd travelled as a family for 18 years sort of straight over October, and somehow I'd stuffed up the dates, and we were there a week earlier than we would normally have been. So it was, in those terms, it was actually quite good because there was time for reflection, and it was just me and the kids. And soon realised that while they were young now, in 5 years' time, you become more of the taxi and than actually needing to be there on a 24/7 basis. They go off to school and have all their events and stuff like that. So that sort of went back to, okay, well, how do we concentrate on the children at the moment? And I just had to literally put in place things that Holly would have wanted to do. Like, we still cook every single night because Holly was an amazing cook. She didn't like takeaway because she didn't know what was in it. So while I'm not the greatest cook, we still try and do that. And it's not so much a homage to Holly, but it's also because, I think these days with all these distractions, then you at least get half an hour with your children in a concentrated point, and you have time to talk around the table, how days were, and things like that. So it's
you've managed to keep that really powerful routine and that connection there that would have been part of what Holly's role would have been, part of how you two balance things. What's been sort of one of the biggest things for you that, when people then talk about that grief and the loss through losing somebody through suicide, what's been one of the bigged things for you there?
It was interesting. I listened to a podcast of another person who lost their partner a few years ago, and it was a term called griefnesia, which, rightly or wrong, even I don't think it's an actual term, but it's so true that, it was probably for about 2 years, I think, that you sort of live in this fog that you sort of get up every day and put one foot in front of the other, and you only, for me, it was the dedication of having two children, needing to know that they're okay, and getting them to school every day and making sure that their mental health doesn't suffer because of the tragedy that we've been through. But then also
Sorry. It's all right, James, just take your time.
It's also interesting, some of the support that other people offer. We have an amazing family, which we're not the Lone Ranger in that, but the camaraderie that my brothers, my father, my mother, my in-laws, they become a very integral part of that. I think that recovery as well. So without those mechanisms that some obviously people don't have, it would be a lot harder.
Is when you think about that time, there might be people who listen in and might be navigating that sort of same type of grief. Was there something that those people in your network did to help support you that made a really big difference?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously, I was blown away when the funeral came and went. I think there was about 600 people at the church, and around that time, there's a lot of focus on the family and the person, the people who are undergoing this grief. And then, you go home after that, and the attention dissipates, and rightfully so. And you're sort of then left with 2 young children, and it's you put those beautiful souls to bed, and it's very easy to you sit there, your children are asleep, and for quite some time, Angus would actually sleep with me. He was about 4.5, I think, at the time. And so, I'd generally go to bed fairly early as well. As he got older and things like that, you're still in that sort of 2-year sort of grief period. And you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs, and, you've got your daily your routine and chores that you need to do, but your mind sort of tends to wander, and different things. It'd be very easy to pick up a bottle of wine, and all of a sudden the wine's gone. But you have to obviously take stock of yourself and make sure that you're doing the right thing by yourself. And one of the pieces of advice that someone gave me was that to look after your children, that you need to be also look after yourself to be the best version of yourself, so that then they are also looked after as well.
And so when you're looking at them, what are the things that work for you? So what was that routine? Was it about putting a routine in place? Did you build in any sort of like specific programs for yourself, or was it just about being kinder to yourself?
I think that certainly I sought help after Holly passed away. I saw a psychiatrist for about 18 months, and it wasn't, I suppose, to start off, was trying to understand what Holly had been through. And, it was the gentleman that I saw, that Holly saw in the lead into her passing. And, there are a lot of key takeaways of that, and, that, there are 7 stages of grief. One of those, I was told, was anger, that's generally directed at that person. Now, obviously, I don't remember all the stages, but that one I certainly didn't ever go through. I didn't, obviously being through the whole journey with Holly, the unimaginable pain that she was actually feeling herself, to actually finally make that decision that, life would be better without her. I couldn't ever imagine in my head of ever suffering from depression. I couldn't ever imagine being at that point. But again, I couldn't be mad at her. We're left with this beautiful legacy. Of my 2 children.
And the legacy part is the beautiful part, I think, of this journey. You have managed to channel something into, as you said, Holly felt the world would be a better place without her, rightly or wrongly.
Definitely wrongly.
Wrongly, in this case, yeah, definitely. But that whole part around then how you've channeled that into being the father you have, how you've then channeled it into being the advocate, the way in which you've been so generous in sharing this story. And, this is 10 years and it's still so painful as it is for you. And we're so grateful for you feeling safe to share this with us. But that whole way in which then you've wanted to do something about it, you've wanted to drive a change, you've been involved with Breakthrough from day one. So we're into our 8th year of you being the very first ambassador who spoke up for the need for change. Obviously through a personal challenge, that's why you've wanted to do this. But what have been some of the other things that you've wanted to focus on that have been so important for you to help other people? And I know we have this conversation, don't we, about I just want to help one more person, and you have those conversations every week, don't you?
Yes, yeah, we do. Look, it's been an incredible journey. I don't do this so much for Holly, but we've spoken about this ripple effect that goes through after a loss like ours. I started this because I would love for one family not to have to go through what we've been through. We've been able to achieve some incredible things, whether it's with the SPP and the hospital system.
We'll need to explain what that is, James, for people who are listening. We've been living, or you've been living and breathing this.
Yeah, look, I mean, after 6 years after the inquest we had, the government have brought in a suicide prevention pact, which is a seven-step process for someone who either has suicidal ideation or has made an attempt on their life. And it's a way of moving them in through the hospital system, but also trying to support them after that as well. So I'm told it's the biggest change in the mental health landscape in about 20 odd years. Wow. So that was a very important step. But there's still so many other steps that I think we haven't reached. I still think there is, while stigma is better, I still think that we need to work harder on the stigma of mental health. I think that, and this is just my personal opinion, I don't think governments actually understand mental health enough. It's a very long, drawn out process. It's not a one tablet fixes anything or everything. It's you go into an emergency department and you've got a broken arm that can be fixed, and you're back at work in a couple of weeks, or 4 to 6 weeks, doing what you normally do. But with mental health, it takes weeks, years, months to try and help someone.
Yeah. I mean, and I think as we've been talking around, some of those changes are about improving access for people, improving understanding, making that pathway smoother, and I think which is one of the biggest challenges we face. Ian, this is a beautiful opportunity to link you in. You work in this really complex space around suicidality, and I'm sure James's story is not a unique story from your clinical practice, but also from that research. What are the sort of patterns we're seeing at the moment in our community that you're coming across that are those areas of biggest focus?
I think in terms of focus on drivers of suicidality, in men at least, there's kind of increased recognition that relational stress and separation are really, really pivotal drivers of suicide as an outcome. And it's not too dissimilar in women. That kind of relational space is a little bit lower from a risk factor perspective. But what we're really seeing, and I think one of the things that stood out in your story was complexity. There's this kind of drive towards this state over time, and it reflects lots of different issues. But oftentimes it's the compounding stresses that stack up. But those key ones are kind of a prior history of mental health issues, in particular a history of self-harm, coupled with separation or financial distress or some other event that I would conceptualize as a loss event. And you talked about identity. That's an element that we don't pick up on enough in terms of loss. But when you do lose that, there's a massive kind of shift that people need to go through in order to redefine who they are, where they fit. Their existence outside of roles. You talked about mother, it's like, who am I outside of all the spaces that I fill? And when you lose that, plus some kind of external loss, you really get stuck in terms of how to move forward. So the reality is we're seeing a lot of complexity, which is not surprising, but really critical points that we need to intervene better. So those stresses I mentioned, but, to your point, the process post contact with healthcare. So we know at least sort of 80% of people who complete suicide are contacting with GPs and primary healthcare in the year prior. At least 40 to 50% have an ED admission prior to suicide. Okay. And so around 70% of those who have contact with ED, emergency department, are there for mental health or substance use.
Yeah.
So the vast majority of people contacting the system are there for mental health issues, but then it kind of falls off post-visit. So if we can, shift that process better and have better coordination between systems, there's a real opportunity to have a much bigger impact at that point. Because at the moment, as a practitioner, sometimes my clients do end up going to emergency department. And I'm wondering, well, what happens after that? And I think, this new consideration of how to better move people through healthcare systems when they need the support is one step forward.
Mm-hmm.
But we also need to make sure that we're very aware of those kind of loss events that really tip someone over the edge and transition you from ideation, so thinking about suicide, to completion. That's a tricky step to kind of predict.
And do you think then that part where from that first contact to an emergency department to back into the community, what happens here? Are they the missing parts of our puzzle at the moment?
Yeah. I mean, I can't speak for everyone's experience as clinicians, but it's not uncommon for me to hear nothing from an ED or a psychiatrist or a mental health assessment in a public system coming back to me as a clinician. And I'm in charge, well, not in charge of, I'm a critical piece of this client's mental health care. So, I don't know what wraparound supports are in place from a public health perspective or community health perspective. I'm waiting for a client to come back to me a week or 2 weeks later, hoping they come back to me a few weeks later, because the system is not talking enough. But also, sending a client into ED is a last resort. It's actually not necessarily helpful for people to go to that point, because they can actually feel as though they didn't get the care that they need, right? I went to this place, I may have got some care, but to your point, it's not a broken arm, cast it, off you go. There's this, period after that you just fall back into the same old pattern of not doing well, and sometimes it compounds and gets worse. So we need other spaces to refer people into for wraparound support. So support around housing and financial factors, okay? Support around relational issues and support around mental health. They're the three key kind of pivot points that we need to make sure we're doing better in. Because if you have someone with multiple stresses across all of those domains, the risk is just really, really high.
So for anyone who might be listening, if someone does present at an ED with a mental illness or in distress in that area, what happens now here in South Australia if someone does that?
Yeah, look, I've never worked in the ED, in the acute mental health space. My understanding is a mental health presentation should go through the pathway of a mental health assessment. My gut feeling, and you would know more than this, having personally experienced the process, is that the primary question, and we've done this in other areas in public health where I've worked, is what is the imminent or immediate risk of this person? So we used to talk about trying to rank people's risk as low, moderate, or high, but now everyone is high risk when they're in mental health crisis. That's reality. What we're trying to do in the system is ask, is this immediate? So if they leave the ward now, are they going to convert to a completed suicide? It's really hard to do that, but that is arguably what happens in the system, because if you're not immediate risk, then we can discharge. If you are, we should try and capture it, but I don't always think that process plays out well.
So I might just jump in here. So, but 10 years ago, we had this transforming health period under one of our governments, and it was very much moving out of a department within 4 hours. So Holly had a presentation in hospital at the ED, and she was discharged within 4 hours afterwards. And unfortunately, we lost her within 48 hours of that actually happening. Since our inquest, we have lobbied the government, and the first change that we were able to actually bring in was change to the Sunrise EPAS system, which we still need to do some work on, because that's only in the major health network hospitals, not a state-based system. Now, the first question that when you arrive in an ED should be asked is, are you under the care of a mental health care provider? And if yes, then you go back through. It goes on through a different branch in the EPAS system. If no, you go back into your standard emergency department admission form. Now, whether that's still happening or not, I don't know. It took us, about 2 years to get the computer system changed. Now, I mean, to me, that's just programming. It would have been a fairly easy thing to actually do. But the second one was the ability to contact a consulting, whether it's your family GP or your psychiatrist. Doing a cross-sectional snapshot of a person's life in, what a busy ED department looks like is only going to be, 3 to 5 minutes of what's going on in your life.
Yeah.
If there is a contact back to someone like yourself or, in my case, could have even been our doctor, who was a very big part of Holly's mental health treatment plan. And if this was the case, had happened, the psychiatrist that Holly was seeing would have actually recommended a further detention or the extension of the mental health order. Holly was booked in to go to a care facility in New South Wales to try and get it all under control. But unfortunately, there wasn't any detention and there wasn't any further treatment.
So I think it's really interesting, isn't it, that the pathways we want to reassure people that there are pathways, but the complexity around there is making sure that response is the right response at that time.
Correct.
So our emergency departments, do an incredible job.
Yes.
But when it's a presentation for a mental health perspective, is that the right place? And how can we alter and change where those conversations happen before it gets to that crisis point? So, the data's showing us about the percentage of people who present to emergency department, but then what happens afterwards?
Yeah.
And then what are the interventions that take place? So we have some incredible NGO services that do that in reach and that pathway in. How do we stop people getting there before that? So a lot of the work that you're now wanting to look at is that early intervention preventative work, Ian, isn't it? So what's the sort of the narratives that are starting to take place in that sort of space? What are we seeing?
I think the aim is to try and intervene in moments that matter. So that doesn't necessarily mean a moment where someone is in crisis. It is about this is a stressor that's happening. How do we wrap support around this person? So be it, a financial crash, business loss, through to, loss of a loved one or separation. We need to lean into those spaces immediately so that we can actually at least put on the table offers of different types of support, because we need to be able to offer variable options. There's no one size fits all, but our system tends to be quite reactive. And so it's usually once everyone is at the end of their tether sort of thing, it ends up being problematic. So we need to be making sure we have those opportunities to intervene much earlier. But we also need to recognize that it isn't necessarily entirely helpful for health systems to be the ones that intervene in that space. Community is so important, being tied into networks of people that are supportive and strong. And that came out in your story, post the suicide, the importance of that network that wrapped around you for support. People that don't have that are particularly vulnerable, and we need to create spaces for people to join into those networks and get that support. So there's plenty of peer support networks now that are up and running. There's lots of variability in terms of the different activities they do. But one of the challenges is linking people with these spaces. So they don't know all of these options exist. Us as clinicians don't always know they exist. So part of what we'll be doing, at least this year, is putting together basically a pack for clinicians to say, at least in my space, working with men, if men come in, here's a range of options that they can go to, in addition to having care. Because it's, you're sitting with a client for 50 minutes and you're trying to rack your brain and think of all the different social support groups that exist. Sometimes it's really practical things like that, but also identifying areas that we aren't doing enough.
Yeah. And those areas where we're not doing enough. I mean, it was the National Suicide Prevention Conference last week, wasn't it? And I think one of the key findings, and it seemed to be a theme continually coming out, was the power of community, and how important, how vital that is.
Football clubs.
So how do we grow there? We've got that, as you say, we've got that sporting community, we've got that farming community, we've got the workplace as a community, we've got our family as our own community.
Yeah.
But are we seeing disconnects at the moment? Is that where some of those challenges are?
Yeah, I was talking to someone recently who spoke about memberships with civic organizations. Decades ago, the average person was connected to at least 5, right? So that this was the average person. Now it's under 1.
Wow.
So clubs, community groups, ethnic groups, all of these places that people used to exist within, sport groups, now people are barely in one, and I don't know the reason for that, other than we've sort of build a very individualistic society, which is educate well, get a job well, get your house, get your family, do your thing. It doesn't necessarily look to going outwards. And phones are part of that issue because it creates the illusion of connectivity, but it's not necessarily there.
Yeah.
Right. And I often think of social media and similar spaces as the place bored people go to try and get some enjoyment. It's not about connection, no matter how much we dress it up. But I think that's an interesting shift over time. Okay, that hasn't necessarily mapped across an increase of suicide as a result of the deconstruction of those communities. But we can't sit here and say that they aren't important and that they're missing, and they're definitely missing. And you know, that's a challenge to get people more and more involved in this space.
I had the pleasure last weekend. I was invited to one of the Italian communities here in South Australia, and they were doing a fundraising event, and they're connected to the local football club. Very strong soccer connection there. The club is run by volunteers. All the cooks in the main place all volunteer, and they're also like 60, 70-year-old people.
Good food then.
Beautiful food, absolutely beautiful food from sort of southern Italy. Yeah. But I was watching this community in a very different way. So that there was 120 people had come to support a couple who'd gone through grief and loss, who'd lost their son to suicide. Wow. That couple weren't actually from this local Italian community. They're from another Italian community, but they'd welcomed them into their community, which was beautiful. They were made to feel, just by the interactions I was watching in the room, this connection, this open love, which was like so beautiful. Yeah. And then it was a little bit like stepping back in time. They had, the person on the keyboard and someone singing and this beautiful connection and people getting up and dancing before they even had their dinner and things like that. And it was just that you saw these interactions. And then they had a beautiful classical guitarist who was sharing some music from local regions. And again, you were getting this beautiful connection. And then they asked me to talk. And as an Englishman getting up in front of a bunch of Italians is quite threatening. And they still, haven't got over the Euros yet. No. But this quiet and this listening and this nodding and the conversations when you started to look at, well, how powerful is a community and what does community really look like? Yeah. And community can look like many, many different things. Correct. And it was just all these different layered of approaches, which was so beautiful. And I was saying, well, how do we mirror that? Because I remember also doing an event once post bushfire, and we had a beautiful community together, and there was a couple sitting outside of the room who was so angry that this group of people were meeting and had been meeting for this period of time, and they didn't know about it, and felt frustrated by that. Yeah. And they'd been frustrated that, we're not necessarily part of that community group. So how can they be getting all this support when? And it did make me think, well, how then do we intersect? How do we connect with other people who might be from different communities? Yeah. And, so...
Just going back one step with something Ian said, obviously the financial stresses of in a relationship can be a big part. And you said that there used to be 5 sporting clubs or associations. I have 2 children, both of them play multiple sports, and there could be 3 events on 2 different games of football on a weekend, and a game of water polo for one kid. So when you think about the cost of being a part of these associations today as well can also be a big driver of why that 5 is now heading down towards 1. I mean, $400 to play football for a and there's obviously insurances and everything else like that based around it, but that could be obviously a reason behind the deterioration of the number of sporting associations you're involved in.
Certainly for sporting groups. I mean, my sons played round football, and it was very expensive, and every year it was like, here we go again.
Did you just call it round football?
Yeah, because in Australia, when you say footy, everyone just thinks AFL, right?
I enjoyed that.
Real football here, real football. And, it does add a layer of stress. I think one of the challenges, that I was thinking about as you were talking through the community group was, and I'm in this position myself now, my kids are in their late 20s. So we're no longer tied into their sporting clubs. And we're kind of in the process of empty nesting, with one still home, the other one's gone. What's our next stage look like in terms of that community connection? My wife had the brilliant idea of taking up dancing. I'm terrible at it, but we've done that. But it's sort
Love
of,
that.
there's a cost to that, right?
Yeah.
So at the same thing, there's all these places you can lean into. Many have a cost, some don't. But I think a lot of people just don't know what those options are.
Mm.
And I must say, like, I'm seeing a lot of different community groups coming up, as much as like we kind of shame social media and our phones. The only reason I know about these are through my phone. So there's a girl here in Adelaide. I think her Instagram is like Date Night Adelaide, and she's probably a little bit younger than I am. But she organises all these different types of events in Adelaide, whether it's like a hike, which is free, and so she'll give like a meeting point and a time and that type of thing. She does events where it'll be like someone will come and talk about a particular topic for like 45 minutes, and you can come and attend that. So she's creating these events because she's seen this need or this desire for people to want to connect with new people. And I think I sent it to you, John. I saw coming up on, might have been Facebook, a group, I believe it's in the UK, that was called Pints and Ponytails.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a group of men who have organised, I think once a month or something like this, for dads, particularly new dads, to come together, and they meeting them where they're at, so they can come, they can have a drink of any type they like, doesn't have to be alcohol, and they get a hairdresser in, and they teach the dads how to maybe like do pigtails or plaits and that type of thing, and it gives them a space.
I know where they're coming from. My daughter won't let me touch her hair. So,
but when I saw that, I just thought that was incredibly beautiful. And this is a group of men who probably looking for that type of connection, a place to talk about the particular nuanced stresses or whatnot that come with being a new dad or a dad in general. But, I am seeing throughout my algorithm, I suppose, different ways for communities to come together, which I think is important.
I mean, similarly, we have people, groups like that here. I mean, Fat Farmers obviously have multiple places around Australia now that they organise events, and men's sheds and places like that are also, I think, moving forward, are going to be integral parts of having a sense of belonging. It's a matter of obviously getting people who are suffering or are under those financial stresses that at least then you can go somewhere that's not necessarily expensive, that they can actually feel a part of and feel a belonging.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. We run a community program called Mates, Meals and Mental Health through Breakthrough, and it brings people together into either a community setting. It could be their sports club, it could be the local town hall, and we've done them outside. We've done them on lean-tos, on community centres. We've done them in shearing sheds, and it's a way in which you bring together people for a meal, and it's that the events are free, which makes it, again, trying to make it as accessible as possible. And sort of delivers a very subtle mental health program around breaking down sort of the stigma that's still associated, getting people to feel comfortable, looking around what vulnerability looks like, open up those opportunities. We've done about 50 of these around the state now, and it's, I find it, one, it's the most beautiful thing to watch this journey take place, because you get a group of people coming who won't share anything for the first 10 minutes. In fact, if you get eye contact, you've done pretty well. We've seen that. And then you give a little bit of information and you just see things relax. And then we do an activity called Step to the Line, which is a real strong vulnerability activity. And then the guard gets dropped and the conversation starts, and then the noise picks up and everyone's, all of a sudden connecting, etc. But within that, we're still seeing some challenges. So we're still seeing, how do we get the right people in that room? So often people will come up to us afterwards and they'll say to us, I've got 5 or 6 mates who should have been here tonight. Can you come back and do it here, and I'll bring those mates. In the research world, in that interaction about people reaching out for help, what are you seeing there, Ian? Are you still seeing that stigma still sits, that language is there, that what is a safe space, or are we seeing a shift?
Look, there's definitely still stigma, but I think it's broken down a lot more than historically. There are groups of people that are now coming into mental health settings that previously wouldn't, but there's also groups of people that need mental health care and don't want to not align, they don't feel like that space is useful for them. And that's where these other options come into play in terms of, getting better doesn't necessarily mean seeing a therapist. It does if that's what you need. It could be better connection with a club and not even talking about your mental health. It could just be that connection. And I think we need to broaden our idea of what help seeking actually looks like. So it's previously been, did they visit the doctor?
Yeah.
And coming to one of your meal sessions is actually a form of help seeking if the person identifies that this is related to me and I'm having that sort of challenge. But in terms of getting other people involved, the power of social prescribing is really important. So if you know someone is, not doing too well, or if you suspect, right, because they may not have said anything, then lean in and try and include that person into a space, and certainly into a space that you think might be useful for them. There's, a few other groups. You mentioned Adelaide Men's Social Walking Group, I think, sort of took off, and that's just guys who come together and go for a walk on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning. That's a good example of saying, if I knew James and James is struggling, say, mate, come for a walk on the weekend. It's actually as much on me as it is on the health system to try and connect James's support. And I think that part is critical. And when we do have better connection into community, that's likely to happen more than it does now, where we're all sort of broken apart. You check in with people, but then you don't see them for a month. So how do you know how they're going in between?
Yeah.
So we have a kind of collective responsibility to try and link people in with support more than we currently do.
James, that connection for you, you got great connection through friendships. You got connection through playing dodgy golf with us, which is improving.
Once in a blue moon.
What have been the most powerful connection points for you?
I have an incredible, my own community at work, and the support that firstly that I got from them was just incredibly powerful. Even to the point early when I went back to work after a couple of weeks, very much they were screening my calls, my appointments. Why do you need to see James? Because there are obviously a lot of people that, with what I do, I know quite a few people. So, and it's beautiful that they want to wish you well, and that but sometimes it's not beneficial at that one point in time.
Yeah.
So it was incredible to have the way that my staff wrap themselves around me. And as a business, we've tried to do that because, whether someone's sick or they've got a ill parent or, and again, you go back to financial stresses. I had one of my staff members' grandmother was very ill in England and she couldn't afford to go. So, we funded the trip for her. So it's a support mechanism that we've always had that philosophy at work,
You're a village.
Yeah, and health comes first, and we've tried to always help those people, and again that was the first point, and then my friendship group again was incredible, multiple people through that have been incredible supporters of myself, but also what I do with Breakthrough as well. So they've also been able to help us with my mental health journey moving forward as well.
That part around varied approaches then is really important. So we've already mentioned that there isn't one size fits all, and how do we sort of connect? Where are you seeing the sort of, Ian, the intersect between the community role and clinical role, and are those two different worlds, or do they actually talk to each other?
They don't talk to each other as much as they should. And I mean, sometimes we're dealing at very different ends of the continuum in terms of crisis and distress. And there's, sometimes there's community groups that probably are not going to know what to do with a person that I might see in clinic. But the earlier we connect these two pieces together, the better supported they are and the better we can communicate across the two platforms in terms of, clinical world and community space. But, whether they work together well or not, I think there's room for growth in that regard.
Yeah. And if we were to look at what we could improve, what would be one of the first things you'd want to look at?
In terms of helping people in crisis? Yeah. I think connection is a huge part. Connecting to people that are good people, that are going to be supportive and check in and know that they can scaffold this person in whatever way they need. So an individual might need a certain form of help that's different from the next person that looks exactly the same in terms of, say, background stress. But being able to shift and flex and adapt and, to your point, screen calls if that's what you need, or, take you to a GP if that's what you need. Having well-connected people that understand the importance of providing support, however it looks for someone, is really important. A lot of people, particularly parents, if I see a teenager who's not doing well, really want to know, how do I stop this bad outcome? And it's sort of like, well, do all the stuff that's important before the outcome. All right. So scaffold how best you can. And I think that's what we all need to do with our own connections is when someone's struggling, what kind of support can I wrap around them? Is it a meal? Is it just a check-in? Is it a meme? I'm regularly trying to connect with people in my network just to check in and say, how are they going? And, my wife has an injury at the moment. My family's been dropping meals off for us. We don't ask, and you don't think how important that is. You take it for granted, but in hindsight, actually that says you're not alone. You're part of a community. When you need support, they'll wrap around. So that's that idea of the kind of social connectivity, being more aware of how critical it is for us to come together all the time and not say, here's the issue, go to this system. Here's a problem, go over there. It's like, it's a shared responsibility for us.
Yeah. And I think I love that language around the scaffolding, because scaffolding doesn't fix something, does it?
No, it enables you to build it, right?
Yeah, and then that's that beautiful part, because I think sometimes people do get concerned, well, I don't want to ask James about this because I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix it for him. I don't know how to reach out to Ian because that must be a really big challenge and I can't fix that. I think a lot of the conversations we have with people are around that it's actually not your job to fix.
No.
But it is
it
put
is
the
your
scaffolding
job
to connect, to say,
hey, what can I help you with at the moment? Or just offer suggestions in. People will say, if I've got a mate who's struggling, what do I do? Well, I say lean in and ask if they've got a good GP, they want you to come around, do you want to go play golf on the weekend? Like, what can I do to help you? You tell me, rather than you need to go and have this thing done and then you're fixed, because it's not how it works. And scaffolding is exactly what you're talking about. It's just providing structure, but the person you're involved with needs to be giving you an idea of what that scaffold looks like. And you need to be able to be okay with what they say. If they say, I'll go to golf, and you think probably a GP would be good, I'll take you to golf because you're telling me that's what you want.
Yeah. And it's just that part, isn't it? That's that then the connection can be the time to actually listen.
Correct.
To gather that information, to then just provide that very simple support and to make someone feel listened to and validated.
Yeah.
And as you build that information, then it might be what's the next stage in the scaffolding I put in. So I do love that whole concept around scaffolding. Leesa, this is sort of an area in which you love to excel, isn't it? And that part around how when you listen to this sort of listening to people or trying to connect them, how to navigate. Your world is very much around that sort of sporty space, that fitness, etc. But the running groups that you're part of are a beautiful connection, aren't they? The gym you go to, I remember Scanlan, and you said sometimes you go to the gym and you might be there for 2 hours. And so long. Not all that time was actually
getting worked out more than anything else.
But how powerful is that the running groups? How incredible are they for those conversations and connections that are now taking place?
I think not everyone's going to be a runner, but I think we talk about having conversations side by side as being really powerful. It's a little less daunting than potentially sitting across from somebody, but I feel incredibly lucky. I lived in Indonesia for 5 years and had to move back during COVID. And I found that time incredibly hard to acclimate back to what life was like here, because like you were saying earlier, Ian, people in Australia tend to be very sort of separated into their own family groups. And maybe if you don't have such a large family, or they're separated in one way or another. So I found that quite difficult. And so I was actively looking for ways to be more involved in my community, and starting out at this new gym that I did a couple of years ago. Like, the people that they're the people that I see the most in my life. I live in a house of my own. I spend 40 hours at 38 hours or whatever at work. And then the people that I see 5 or 6 times a week, they're the ones who know what's happening in my life probably more than anyone else. So people at the gym, people in the running groups now, or the barista we've talked about before, the people who see you regularly actually play a really instrumental role in your mental well-being and your mental health. And as we know, mental health is, on this spectrum of like really great mental health at one end and mental illness potentially being at the other. And it's the things that we do regularly that keep us somewhere along that spectrum. And for me, I think about, the 1%ers, quote unquote, that we do every day and how they can influence that. And it's, the people that we cross paths with even by chance, you know.
It's funny you say that. A friend of mine recently, they're quite an accomplished sporting person and recently got an injury, and all of a sudden that sporting journey disappears. And they said to me the other day that it was incredible after a week of basically not being able to walk, was the actual isolation. And that was the actual word they used, the isolation, because, when 65% of your time is spent at a gym training with your teammates and everything else like that, if you can't do that, all of a sudden your connectivity and you become isolated.
Absolutely. And I think what's great to be able to take away from that is, like, if somebody's listening, like how easily you can impact somebody else. Like I think I went through a week of where I wasn't quite feeling myself, and I find it very hard not to show exactly who I am on my face at all times. And so it was someone at the gym who, I think this was on like a Wednesday or Thursday, and I maybe hadn't been chatting for half of the time I was there. And it was one of those people who I don't see outside of those four walls messaged me on Instagram to check in. And so like the profound effect that had on me, that person didn't have to message me. They don't see me outside of that. But I guess like what I'd love people to take away who are listening to this is how easy it is to check in on somebody and to have some form of positive impact on their mental health and help with that scaffolding in some small way.
Yeah.
So in it, sort of linking onto that then, so are the things that you've put in that are your scaffolding that manage your mental health and well-being? You're working,
me personally?
You're working in this space all the time. You're hearing stories, you're listening and trying to guide people, and that has an impact on you as an individual as well. So
it does.
What are the sort of things that help you look after you?
I have a protocol. All right, and I talk to guys that I see now about protocol. That is, what is your daily protocol? Because a protocol is something you set up that is designed to make sure you have some kind of safe working or safe living practice, right? So for me, it's either gym before 6, because otherwise I don't go after work. I'm like, I'll drive and I'm just going to swing in, no, it doesn't happen. So, 4:50 alarm goes off and I think, oh God. But get to the gym, feel amazing. If I'm not at the gym, I'm walking the dog. I've got a little French bulldog. He's arrogant and stubborn. But if he doesn't get his walk, it's a problem. But it's as much about me moving my body at the start of the day for me is absolutely critical. 5 years ago, that wasn't happening and my mental health was not in a great space. But for me, personally, movement doesn't have to be exercise. To your point, not everybody likes running, but go for a 40-minute walk in the morning. It's actually great for your circadian rhythm. It's like a washing machine for your brain, gets you fired up for the day. And then for me, I've got a pretty, not a tight structure around food, but if I'm not organized, everything falls over. So it's not like I'm, this kind of fit person or whatever, but if that's not in place, there's an extra stress. And then I get to work and there's another stress. And then I'm, down on the run, grabbing a pie and something else. And there's kind of like a domino effect. So movement, organization around food. And for me, I have to be really mindful of substances in my life. So I've got a long family history of addiction. I know what that feels like in terms of having that sort of motivational pull into that space. So I'm, to your point where you said you could quite easily pick up a bottle of wine, knock it down, not even realize. I have to personally keep my compass in the right direction in terms of leaning out of spaces that my brain would quite happily go into, because it's not going to be helpful for me. But it's trial and error over time, and I'm constantly thinking, if I'm not in a good space, then what part of my protocol has dropped off or what needs to be shifted.
Mm.
So that's kind of the bulk for me, and being well connected with family in particular and some friends.
Yeah. And there's some beautiful parts around there around that structure and that strategy, and but also how often do you kind yourself? How often do you give yourself that little fallback and say that's actually okay? It's
something I've had to work on in terms of give myself a little bit of breathing space, because if you've been into a mental health crisis in the past and you have a bad day and it feels a little bit like that crisis, you can quickly have a brain that says, here we go. And then you've got to pull yourself up and be like, you know what, maybe I've got a virus. Okay, and this is what I do now. Maybe I've had a shit sleep. Maybe it's, I'm moving into Monday morning and I've had a busy weekend. Like there's all these contextual reasons why I might not be great. And that for me is giving myself some space and some self-care and saying, just give yourself a day off and then back on the horse, rather than have this kind of catastrophic thinking, which is everything's terrible, we're going downhill again, something else. In terms of, particularly putting self-care around my clinical work, I compartmentalize a lot of that, which, on the one hand, people would say being stoic and not talking about certain things is not helpful. But for me, it very much is helpful in certain contexts. There's things, clinicians here that you don't want to hear. I don't need to disclose that to feel better, But I do head home often with no music in the car. People find that weird.
I do that.
No
I love it.
I just need silence.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, when your brain's too full.
Correct. But I'll podcast a lot as well. So listening to podcasts, because it's, information gathering, keeps my mind busy. All of those things for me represent a bit of self-care as well.
That's brilliant. I mean, this podcast is called The Safe Space.
Yeah.
So what's your safe space?
My safe space is probably in the car. Yeah, because it's just me, right? I can have the sound on or off. I can have a podcast on or off. I can have a coffee. I can, control the temperature. It's like, this is my space. More so at home now with my eldest moved out and fewer people around. That's much more comfortable. When they were there and friends were there and partners were there and it's like, it's a safe space, but it's like,
it grows.
A bit of an overload. Yeah. So for me, it's probably the car, to be honest, or the boat.
Yeah.
Mostly the car.
What about you, James? Where's your safe space for you?
Oh, look, having two busy kids, it's actually hard to actually find that safe space sometimes. I'm not the world's greatest at golf and I don't play it enough, but, whacking a little white ball around parklands for 3 or 4 hours on a Friday afternoon is actually a pretty therapeutic place. And, the pardon the language, but the shit talk you get up to with your mates is incredibly therapeutic. And there's also those opportunities to check on those other three people. Yeah, we had a couple of incredible conversations last Friday with one of my mates, more about something that was going on in his life. And I think that went on for about 4 holes until one of the other golfers put the kibosh on it. We're falling behind. But, that or I really enjoy time in the car with my children. My daughter now drives, obviously, herself now. And I really miss those that connectivity with your children, and you find out more about what's going on in their lives sometimes in that 3 to 5 to 10 minute drive than you do anywhere else.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, very much so. It was interesting. It was my daughter came around for Mother's Day yesterday, and we just went for a bit of a walk. And when we went to walk the dog, and that conversation and that opportunity to sort of catch up and find out what's going on, which is a safe, just walking next to each other, etc. And yeah, I miss those car conversations. We used to have those. I was a swim dad, so I had the 4 o'clock conversations, and you sort of miss that when it's not there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you guys for joining us.
Thanks for having us
today.
Pleasure.
Thank you for obviously sharing an incredibly powerful personal story, and your love for Holly is just absolutely inspiring. But thank you for wanting to make a difference and to try and use that narrative in a very, very different way. And for Ian, your work that you're doing in this space, it's so important for us, especially here at Breakthrough. It's important that the work that we're doing, and to see how we can support you and how we can grow and help that to expand even further. But when you see the impact it's starting to have, it just fills us with that hope for the future. And I think that's one of the conversations, one of the points we're trying to get out of our podcast is despite the complexity of the challenges we're often having, we are seeing a change.
Yes.
We are seeing difference. We are seeing things that are exploring different approaches and different styles. And it's because of people like you that are making that difference. So thank you for joining us today. We've really appreciated it and loved listening to the narratives.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Before we close today's conversation, we want to take a moment to remind you that if anything we've spoken about today has felt heavy or stirred something inside of you, that you are not alone and support is available. In Australia, you can reach out to Lifeline on 13 11 14, 24 hours a day. You can also connect with Beyond Blue, Suicide Callback Service, the South Australian Mental Health Triage Service, or 1-800-RESPECT. These services are there to listen without judgment. If reaching out to a service doesn't feel right for you today, consider connecting with somebody that you trust, like a friend, a family member, or a professional. A small step towards connection can make a real difference.
This is a safe space